Hello, AP Psychology students, and welcome to Section 3 of Chapter 9. We're looking at Operant Conditioning in our learning chapter. We're going to look at voluntary behavior today. Remember, classical conditioning is innate or involuntary behavior, so how do we get people to do things that they want to do or we want them to do that they can control? So it's also known as instrumental conditioning or incentive learning or operant learning, or the learning and conditioning are kind of interchangeable. It's an organism's response operates or produces effects on the environment. So basically, the outcome of your behavior, what happens afterwards to you, dictates whether or not your behavior will do it again or increase or decrease. So the effects influence whether the behavior will occur again. Behaviors can be complex, they can be voluntary, they can be everything from, turning the lights off when you leave the room to writing an essay, a 5 paragraph essay. These are all things that you've learned to do through shaping and other criteria, other concepts in operant conditioning. And so we get to talk about this wonderful looking gentleman here, Burris Frederick Skinner, better known as B.F. Skinner, who's a different looking chap, but a couple classes ago, some of the ladies in the class dubbed him the hot one. So he is now forever known as the hot one in psychology. I'm not sure what's going on there, but B.F. Skinner, man, who lived from 1904 to 1990. So early on, the birth of, it's also called radical man, behaviorism, is Edward Thorndike, going way back, studied cats, trying to escape a puzzle box for scraps of fish. And so the scraps of fish, and they would get them to pull some levers or pull down a rope or open a door, was a reward. It was a reinforcer, so it was reinforcing the cat's behavior. The behavior was controlled by its consequences, and then B.F. Skinner took it further. He took what Watson did and said, no, we can do this. We can do voluntary behavior. He called his approach radical behaviorism because he wanted to distinguish himself from Watson, who emphasized classical conditioning, which is it sets associations, but it's only innate involuntary behavior. So to understand behavior, we must focus on the external consequences because you can measure those. And so in every action, there is a reaction. That's like physics, right? Those are the laws of nature. I think that goes back to Isaac Newton. So there are neutral consequences. There are things that are unrelated. So if you tell a joke and somebody, opens up a pack of gum and chews it, that's a neutral behavior. And so that doesn't really, it neither increases or decreases the probability that the response will recur. Reinforcement, and this is where it gets a little complicated. If you have a reinforcement, that basically increases the likelihood or makes it more likely that it's going to recur. So it's going to happen again. A punishment decreases the likelihood or makes it less likely to occur again. And so when we think neutral, we obviously think of the Swiss Army, because the Swiss are very neutral, unlike the French who like to surrender. The sooner a reinforcer or punisher follows a response, the greater the effect. And so that association piece comes into it a little bit more. And it makes a little more sense when we get into it a little more in depth. So there are things called primary and secondary reinforcers, and there's primary and secondary punishers. Primary things are punishers or reinforcers are things that we do not have to learn. We just know they're good or bad. Food, water, novel touch to the skin, comfortable air temperature are primary reinforcers. They're likely to increase behavior. Pain, extreme heat, extreme cold, anything inherently unpleasant like loud noises. Remember this? Oh, zippity doo dah. And so those things we don't have to learn. They're unpleasant, and we understand those. We need to learn them. Learned rewards and deterrents are secondary reinforcers and secondary punishers. Money, praise, getting a gold star, sticker, high five, those are all secondary reinforcers. Likewise, secondary punishers would be like fines, scolding, bad grades. When you give you a D, if you were a little 5-year-old, you're like, what's a D? I have no idea. And so those are things you have to learn in terms of, that's what a secondary punisher or reinforcer is. So let's get going here. It gets complicated because we're going to talk about positive and negative reinforcement, and then there's positive and negative punishment. And so positive reinforcement is pretty easy. That's a reward. It's adding something pleasant, something you like, in hopes of increasing behavior. So we have to look first. Do we want behavior to go up or do we want behavior to go down? If we want that behavior to occur more and more, we're going to reinforce it. And so if I give you a high five, there'd be a secondary reinforcer, but it's positive. You like the high five if you like me. And then I want that behavior to happen again. Likewise, if you're doing really good on a test and I give you some M&Ms, that's a positive reinforcement. It's something pleasant. You like the sugar. You like the chocolate. I want that behavior to continue. Negative reinforcement is the removal of something negative or avoiding something you don't like in hopes of increasing behavior. So once again, it's behavior going up. It's increasing. And this is where it gets kind of complicated. We hear negative reinforcement and we think, oh, it's punishment. No, we want the behavior to increase. And so some examples of these. Most people brush their teeth. They do it every day or twice a day to avoid cavities, to avoid bad breath. And so the behavior is increasing because we want to avoid something unpleasant. We wear a seatbelt in our car when we're driving because we want to avoid getting injured or killed in a car accident. We wear deodorant to avoid stinking. And so that behavior increases. So it's not a punishment, and it's also not rewarding poor behavior. Like, hey, you failed that test. Let's go get a burger. It's not that at all. And so negative reinforcement is actually the best teacher. It is really powerful. It works well. Here's a picture of it here. So for every day your math grade stays below a B, your father will post a video of himself on YouTube. So basically, this is going to happen until your grade increases, and then we will take away something unpleasant. So then on the other side, we have punishment. Punishment, we want behavior to decrease. So adding something unpleasant in hopes of decreasing behavior. Most of us were probably spanked as children. So they're adding pain to our bottoms, so we will stop throwing fits or pulling hair or making fun of siblings or whatever. So you're adding something negative. Now, when you get older, punishment kind of shifts. And so adults will use more negative punishment. We're going to remove something you like. Your phone, you are grounded from your phone until you stop, arguing with me. Does that make sense? So we're taking away something pleasant. Now, if I want the behavior to go up and I take something away, now I'm doing negative reinforcement. So basically, I'm taking your phone away until you get your grades up to an A. It would be negative reinforcement. I'm removing something. And so it gets, actually, that's still a punishment, my bad. It's really, this is where it gets so tricky. It's a matter of semantics. If I take away something you like in hopes that it stops your bad behavior, it stops your failing grade, that's punishment. If I remove something in hopes that you raise your grades, now I'm reinforcing it, and it gets really, really tricky. And this is really, really difficult. That's why what I really highly recommend is you look at it, do we want behavior to increase or decrease? Increase means it's a reinforcer. Decrease means it's a punisher. And then from there, you can determine if it's negative or positive. So here's a little handy dandy chart. We have positive reinforcement, adding something valuable or desirable. Negative reinforcement is avoiding something unpleasant. Positive punishment, adding something unpleasant like sitting in the corner. And then negative punishment is removing something you like in hopes of decreasing behavior. So we're going to skip that because I want to like high free rights. So let's watch this. This is Skinner.
Some bit of its behavior. Suppose we take turning to the left a little bit. The pigeon is hungry, and we can give it a bit of food as what we call a reinforcer. It's a reinforcing consequence. We wait until it turns to the left and then immediately give it a bit of food. Almost at once we can see that it's turning to the left more rapidly than it did before, or more often.
Reinforcement makes it more likely that we will repeat a behavior. Often, we're not even aware that this learning is taking place.
There's a story about a professor who
B.F. Skinner, baby.
Publicly on television, and his students decided to shape his behavior. And so they agreed in advance that they would not smile or nod unless he was standing on one corner of this platform. And very soon he spent the time standing there. And then they arranged that they would not smile or nod unless he was facing the blackboard. And they told me that at the end of the hour, he was lecturing, facing the blackboard and talking over his shoulder.
There are two types of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement makes it more likely that we will repeat a behavior because we want more of the reinforcer. For example, even though the professor wasn't aware of how his behavior was being shaped, he adjusted his position in response to the student's smiles and nods. On the other hand, negative reinforcement makes it more likely we will repeat a behavior because we want to avoid a consequence. For instance, we are likely to repeat the behavior of paying our bills on time because we want to avoid the consequence of a late charge. Likewise, we are likely to repeat the behavior of taking vitamin C because we want to avoid the consequence of getting a cold.
Oh boy, back to the Marines.
Both positive and negative reinforcement can be found in the Marine Corps Basic Training Program. But the one the most people associate with boot camp is negative reinforcement. The recruits learn from the drill instructors just how effective this type of conditioning can be.
We believe in setting up recruits for success. Before we make them do anything, we explain it to them. And we explain it to them in detail.
You're going to lay on your right, you stupid? Yeah! You're going to lay at the bottom of your feet, even with my ratchets to your step. Yeah! You're away to your step. Yeah!
Now, one, they may not understand the detail because it's coming out a little bit louder, and they're a little bit intimidated at first. But first, they have to realize that, one, they do listen to the drill instructor, and they get the desired response. The drill instructor, one, won't yell as much the next time.
Within a limited
Because they
amount
yell
of time,
all the time.
recruits are expected to learn a long list of behaviors. The significant vocal abilities of the drill instructors act as negative reinforcement to get the job done. Do the job right, and they avoid being yelled at. Negative reinforcement in action.
Every moment of the day of a recruit's life is planned out. From the moment when he wakes up at 5:30 in the morning till he goes to bed at 21:30, every second is planned. So that there's no time for any error. There's no time for any guesswork. There's no time for someone to go, okay, what am I doing now? Our standards have been passed down. They're tried, true, and they're tested. So, for example, up at 5:30 in the morning, he knows that when he has to get up, he's going to get up, stretch, brush his teeth, get to go into the bathroom. From there, he's going to go on to eat his first meal of the day. He knows he has to make sure that the area is cleaned up correctly. We make Mothers of America proud when our recruits come back home. He knows how to make a bed probably for the first time. A lot of mothers marvel when their son comes back and says, he made his bed for the first time, and all I have to do is turn the lights on. And after that, then he's going to probably go into some physical fitness. And again, too, as I mentioned before about our physical fitness, that is planned and standardized. And from there, he might be exposed to a series of classes, academic-type classes, or he might be on the parade deck working drill. And this would go through most of the day. Towards the end of the day, it's the time when the senior drill instructor is going to get to work with his recruits. And then again, too, before they go to bed that night, again, it's standardized. He's going to have to know how to get into the shower, and we expect him to shave, prepare his body, prepare his uniform, to the point that he's going to shine his shoes. And we want that all laid out. He's going to be inspected. His body's going to be inspected. His hygiene's going to be inspected. I want to make sure that he's going to present himself in the best image possible the next day.
Another important component of operant conditioning is called discriminative stimulus. This is an environmental cue or signal that sets the stage for a behavior to occur. For example, we wouldn't answer a telephone unless it were ringing. Why not? Because there would be no one there. We would not be reinforced for answering it. The ringing is a cue, a discriminative stimulus. When we hear ringing, we are likely to pick up the phone because someone will be there. In other words, because we will be positively reinforced for doing so. We discriminate between the stimuli of a ringing and non-ringing phone. Likewise, an 18-year-old male is unlikely to make a bed so quickly for his mother The presence of the Marine drill instructor is a discriminative stimulus that cues the different behavior.
You're moving entirely too slow. Why are you... Stop moving right now. You better get your head down straight to the front. Why are you moving so goddamn slow? You better stop moving all that fast, you understand me? Yes, sir!
The role of the drill instructor is almost preordained before they get to recruit training, because they know that the drill instructor is, one, a disciplinarian. Our recruiters, the job they do to prepare a recruit before he comes to recruit training, sits there and says, hey, you're not going to summer Boy Scout camp. You're going to be meeting the infamous Marine drill instructor.
By the same token, recruits quickly learn they can relax a little around the senior drill instructor. The different discriminative stimulus leads to a different behavior.
Now, the hierarchy of how drill instructors work is they're going to have someone that's a senior drill instructor. And he's filling the all-encompassing role of, one, he's in charge of the recruits, and he's the man responsible directly for their training. But he's also the one that's also going to represent, their teacher. He's going to represent their father figure in some respects. The recruits are going to see him in the role as the senior drill instructor, this father figure, this man that I could go and talk to when I have to.
Although negative reinforcement is the overwhelming choice for Marine Corps drill instructors, examples of positive reinforcement can be found, and they are often delivered by the senior drill instructor.
In my senior drill instructor creed, I tell the recruits that I'm still going to be there even when they quit on themselves. I want the recruits to believe that. And I'm going to do it. I have to be that example. So I'm going to positively reinforce certain aspects of their training. If they achieve a success, I'm going to let them know about it and congratulate them.
Yes, sir. I will never fail my time. Remember that.
At recruit training, we have a system of rewards that the recruits receive, and there's trophies that they could achieve if they win certain events. And it's bragging rights between other platoons. So we create and we foster competition here because the recruits are learning how to succeed.
The difference between positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement is easy to recognize. However, many people confuse negative reinforcement with punishment. In fact, they produce opposite effects on behavior. Negative reinforcement makes it more likely that we will repeat a certain behavior, such as making a bed correctly so we don't get yelled at. Punishment, on the other hand, makes it less likely that we will repeat a behavior. For example, a recruit who is punished for looking away from the drill instructor is less likely to look away from him the next time.
We have a system that we call incentive training. This is one of the many tools that a drill instructor has as far as meting out discipline. An example of incentive training is, say, the group, the entire platoon of recruits, maybe they're just, that day they're not performing up to an achievable standard. They might be a little bit slower. They may not be sounding off loud enough to the drill instructor. At the discretion of the senior drill instructor, he'll take him over to an area and make him go through a very ritualized set of upper body exercise over a certain amount of time. And usually the recruits understand that they disappointed the senior drill instructor, and he has to sit there and take time from his day to stop this ritualized training that we're doing and waste time to met out the discipline. So recruits will feel bad. We disappointed him. The end state that we hope a recruit leaves here after achieving, with incentive training, is to understand that if you mess up in the Marine Corps, you're going to be disciplined, you're going to be corrected, and then you're going to be expected not to make the same mistake twice.
Although punishment may decrease undesirable behaviors, it does have its drawbacks. Punishment alone does not offer long-term solutions. Once the punishment is withdrawn, undesirable behaviors often reoccur. Skinner himself considered positive reinforcement to be a vastly preferred alternative.
Punishment works, but punishment can only be justified if you continue to look for other ways, and they will be through the use of positive reinforcement. There was a Boulder 2 experiment in Mexico, where they used every conceivable way of finding positive reinforcement for their children rather than punishment, And their children are wonderful. I've never seen happier, more social, pleasant children in my life. They never are punished because the world is so designed that they never do anything that calls for punishment. And that is the way I think the world should be.
Time and again, the principles of classical and operant conditioning have demonstrated their effectiveness and have helped us to understand how we learn. Perhaps that's why the Marines have used these techniques to train their recruits for as long as anyone can remember. Because for recruits, as for the rest of us, learning is more than the acquisition of knowledge. It is adopting new behaviors and discovering new ways of dealing with an ever-changing environment. Learning is a process that goes on from morning until night, a critical part of the human experience.
All right, some good stuff there about the the operant conditioning and how it's used, especially in the Marine Corps, and how it applies to life. So the Skinner box, as mentioned, was a favorite experimental tool to test these principles, and really to look at positive reinforcement, to get a pigeon to do what they wanted through rewards. Now, extinction, just like with classical conditioning, if you remove the reinforcer or the punisher, the behavior will return in terms of a punisher, or the behavior will go away if you're not going to reinforce it. So reinforcers removed, the behavior ceases. If the punishment is removed, the behavior increases. And then we also have stimulus generalization, just stimulus discrimination, being reinforced for similar action. So maybe you get an allowance for sweeping the living room, and then you clean the kitchen too, and you get a little extra money because you generalize that cleaning will lead to a reward. Discriminating between reinforcers is different. Just like they said, you don't answer a phone that's not ringing because you will not be reinforced to have someone on the other side. We are reinforced to answer the phone because we know we're going to be reinforced to talk to somebody. So discriminative stimulus is a stimulus that signals when a particular response is likely to be followed by a certain type of consequence. And consequence is not negative. It just means what comes after your behavior. So it's a reinforcer or a punisher. Like I said, that's answering a phone when it rings. Some other things is you can schedule these things. Learning is usually more rapid if the response is reinforced every single time. And yet we can't always reinforce every single behavior. No reaction is actually, it's likely to change behavior. That could be a punishment. When you tell a joke and nobody laughs, you're not likely to tell that joke again. Or maybe you just repeat it and say it slower and a little louder and then laugh at yourself. I don't know. And so continuous reinforcement is when you basically are reinforced every single time you do a behavior. Intermittent or partial schedule reinforcement is reinforcing some behaviors, but not all of them. And so there's two types. There's a fixed or variable ratio. So like if you're a baseball player, every 3 strikes that you throw, you get an out. Likewise, if you're a hitter, every 4 balls, you get to go to first base. And then you have fixed or variable interval. Most you guys get a paycheck every 2 weeks. Or if you work in education, you get one once a month. That's a fixed interval. And fixed ratios, like I said, was when 4 balls and you go to first, or 3 strikes and you're out. Variables is when you don't know, like playing the lottery. You know that one person out of 150 million is going to win, but we don't know when you're going to win or who's going to win. That's a variable ratio. Variable interval is you're not sure when it's going to happen, but at some point it will. Just like if you play a slot machine, if you pull the lever enough times, at some point that will produce a winner. You just don't know when. And so this can actually lead to superstitions, obsessions, addictions. In fact, variable intervals and variable ratios can really cause behavior to change and cause people to keep doing things over and over and over again. Shaping is when you reinforce behaviors that are successfully more similar to the desired behavior. The picture we have here is from Bruce Almighty. When he had the power of God, he made his dog use the bathroom. And then he realized he needed to shape him. So the dog liked to pee on the chair. So he would take the pillow outside and then teach the dog where to go on the tree. And then eventually he could remove the pillow and the dog would go on the tree. School is all about shaping. You wrote an essay in this class. You wrote a research paper, and that was shaped for over 12, 13 years of schooling. You had to learn how to hold the pencil and how to write your letters and how to sound it out. Then you had to learn how to write sentences, and you had to learn nouns and verbs, and it just built and built and built. And then you had to learn paragraphs and topic sentences, and then thesis statements, and then APA and Chicago and MLA and all that stuff was all shaped from day one as a kindergartner when you were learning your ABCs. And so you can use successful approximations, things that kind of lead you step by step to get to, how to run a defense or how to run, a play in football. So behaviors that are ordered in terms of increasing similarity and closeness to a desired response. We do have limits on learning, though. Animals and people are limited by their genetic dispositions and physical characteristics. You can't teach a dog how to speak. They don't have the vocal cords. You can't teach a human to swim underwater for days upon days without equipment. They are limited to that. There's also instinctual drift with operant conditioning as well. So Skinner is controversial in psychology because he insisted that free will was an illusion, that basically we were controlled by the outcomes, that we always were controlled by reinforcers or punishment. We're simply shaped by our environments and our genetic heritage, so he didn't really care about what happened in the mind. And so because of that, he's seen as a very cold-blooded, calculating person, which if you watch that video, he's kind of a warm, pleasant old man. He was recognized as the humanist of the year. Remember humanism, power of positive thinking, by the American Humanist Association in 1972. That was a long video, and I'm sorry that was really long. I hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something. If you have any questions, let me know.